The morning sun had just begun to stretch its golden fingers across the quiet city streets when Ethan Vale, a weary single father and rideshare driver, wiped the sleep from his eyes and started his car. The air was crisp, the roads nearly empty, and his mind was heavy with the weight of overdue bills and the constant worry of raising his 7-year-old daughter, Mia, alone. His wife, Clara, had passed away 2 years earlier in a car accident, leaving Ethan to juggle grief, parenthood, and survival. He drove nights, mornings, weekends, whatever it took to keep food on the table and his little girl's world intact. He never complained, but deep down, he was exhausted. That morning, fate had a plan waiting for him, one that would test the limits of his courage and change the course of his life forever. Before we go deeper into this powerful true life-inspired story, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of doing good even when no one's watching, please take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Midnight Reports 1. It helps stories like this reach hearts that need them most. As Ethan turned onto a quiet stretch of highway just outside the city, the world seemed almost peaceful. Birds scattered across the dawn sky, and the hum of his old car was the only sound he heard. But suddenly, in the distance, a flash of light tore through the calm, a violent screech of metal, a thunderous crash that sent shivers down his spine. Ethan slammed his brakes and pulled over instinctively. What he saw next froze him. A police cruiser lay on its side, smoke curling from the hood. The windshield was shattered, and the front end was crumpled like paper. Without thinking, Ethan jumped out of his car and sprinted toward the wreck. Inside, he saw Officer Harper Linwood, unconscious, her uniform bloodstained, trapped behind the steering wheel. Flames had begun licking at the car's underside. "Stay with me," Ethan muttered to himself as he yanked at the door. It wouldn't budge. He kicked, pulled, screamed for help, but there was no one else around. The fire grew hotter, closer. Then he spotted a broken branch on the ground. Using all his strength, he jammed it between the frame and the door, prying it open inch by inch until it finally gave way. Smoke filled his lungs, his eyes stung, but he didn't stop. He reached in, unbuckled Harper's seatbelt, and dragged her out moments before the car exploded behind them. The blast knocked him to the ground, flames soaring into the air, but Harper was alive. Barely. Ethan pulled her away from the heat, his arms trembling as he checked her pulse. She coughed weakly, eyes fluttering open for a second. "You're not safe," she whispered before losing consciousness again. Sirens wailed in the distance, a backup patrol responding to her crash. When paramedics arrived, they found Ethan covered in ash, his jacket singed, kneeling beside her and whispering prayers. He didn't even tell them his name. When they rushed her away, he just nodded, turned, and drove off quietly before the sun had fully risen. The next day, local news outlets were buzzing with the story of the mystery man who saved Officer Harper Linwood's life. Dashcam footage had captured part of the rescue, but Ethan's face wasn't clearly visible. He didn't want attention, he just wanted to get back to Mia, who had woken up that morning asking, "Daddy, why do you smell like smoke?" He smiled, kissed her forehead, and simply said, "Because sometimes, sweetie, doing the right thing leaves a little mark on you." A few weeks passed. Life went on. Ethan kept driving, though his car was running on borrowed time. The engine rattled, the tires were worn, and his earnings barely covered gas. One afternoon, as he picked up a fare outside a hospital, a woman in a crisp navy uniform approached his car. She looked vaguely familiar until Ethan saw her eyes. It was Officer Harper Linwood. She smiled softly, still bearing faint scars on her temple. "You're the man who saved me," she said quietly. Ethan froze, unsure what to say. I just did what anyone would do," he stammered. "No," Harper replied firmly. "You did what most people wouldn't. You risked your life for a stranger. I've been looking for you ever since." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He hadn't realized anyone had noticed. But Harper wasn't just there to thank him, she was determined to repay him. She learned he was a single dad, struggling to stay afloat, and it broke her heart. Over coffee, he told her about Clara, about how every night he drove to keep their small apartment, and how his daughter sometimes waited up just to see him before bed. Something in Harper shifted that day. She had spent her whole career serving others, but this was different. She couldn't shake the image of this man who had saved her life and still carried the weight of the world alone. A few days later, Ethan received a letter. It was from the city police department, officially recognizing his act of heroism. They invited him to a ceremony. Ethan didn't want to go, he wasn't comfortable with the attention, but Harper insisted. "You deserve this, Ethan," she said. "Sometimes the world needs to see what real courage looks like." The ceremony was small but heartfelt. Ethan stood on stage, awkward but humble, holding Mia's hand as the police chief handed him a plaque. Cameras flashed, reporters cheered, but the most powerful moment came afterward when Harper pulled him aside and said, "I've been working on something for you." She handed him an envelope. Inside was a job offer, an official position as a city fleet driver with full benefits, health insurance, and a steady income. Ethan couldn't believe it. "Harper. I don't know what to say," he whispered, tears welling up. She smiled and said, "You saved my life. The least I can do is help make yours a little easier." From that day forward, things began to change. Ethan finally quit his late-night driving shifts. He got to tuck Mia in every evening, reading her bedtime stories without worrying about bills or exhaustion. Harper often stopped by with dinner or joined them for park outings. Slowly, a bond began to grow, one built not from pity or obligation, but from shared gratitude and quiet respect. Months passed, and Ethan's life blossomed in ways he never imagined. He started volunteering with the police department's community outreach program, teaching young drivers about road safety. Harper continued to heal, both physically and emotionally, from the accident that nearly took her life. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both felt that destiny had intertwined their paths for a reason. But life has a way of testing the strongest hearts. One rainy afternoon, Ethan got a call that Harper had been injured again, this time while protecting a child during a chase. He rushed to the hospital, fear gripping him like ice. When he saw her lying in bed, pale but conscious, she smiled faintly. "You're not supposed to see me like this again," she whispered. Ethan held her hand tightly and said, "Hey, you saved me this time. You gave me a second chance at life, Harper. Now it's my turn to stay by yours." In the weeks that followed, he visited her daily. They talked for hours about life, about second chances, about the strange way pain sometimes leads us to the people we were meant to find. When Harper finally recovered, she met Mia properly for the first time. The little girl ran up and hugged her, saying, "Daddy says you're his hero." Harper's eyes filled with tears. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. "Your daddy is mine." A few months later, Ethan stood in front of a small crowd again, not to receive an award, but to speak. The police department had invited him to share his story at a community event about courage and compassion. As he looked out over the audience, his voice trembled. "I used to think my life was about surviving," he began. "About working harder, driving longer, just to make it through another day. But then one morning, I stopped for someone in need. I didn't know her name, I didn't think about myself, I just acted. And that one choice changed everything. Not because I expected a reward, but because kindness has a way of circling back when you least expect it." He glanced toward Harper and Mia sitting together in the front row, smiling through tears. "If there's one thing I've learned," Ethan continued, "it's that even when life feels broken, it can still surprise you with something beautiful. You just have to keep showing up, with heart." The room fell silent for a moment before erupting in applause. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat as Harper stood and joined him on stage, slipping her hand into his. The crowd cheered, not just for a hero, but for a story of hope reborn from tragedy. By the time the sun set that evening, the world outside the community hall glowed with soft amber light. Ethan and Harper walked side by side, their paths forever changed by one morning on a lonely highway. And though they never could have predicted it, that single act of courage had given them both a reason to believe again in love, in healing, in the quiet power of doing what's right.